Hey everyone, this is Mike, and today I'm going to be doing a overview of the level 80 warrior. This video is gonna be the same as Gunbreaker, which I did yesterday, where I'll talk about their skills, talk about their rotation a bit, where it fits in a team composition, and then also its defensive capabilities. In the first part, I'll just be going over most of their skills and combos, whereas during the defensive portion of the video, I'll just have a loop of me hitting a dummy for 3 minutes go. So that you have some sort of an idea about its rotation. Off the bat, Warrior is one of the most defensive tanks when it comes to personal mitigation. I think it's only beaten by Dark Knight, although you could argue about it that Warrior probably is better because home gang and its all-aroundness, because Dark Knight mainly wants magical fights, even though 90% of the tank busters in these fights are magical. But Warrior is mainly the sustain tank. Warrior has a lot of capabilities to keep itself alive when shit hits the fan, and this becomes really apparent in dungeons as well. In dungeons it can get a little bit crazy, where you can just say to your healer, you don't have to worry about me for the next 10 seconds because I will just heal myself to full by doing damage. So Warrior is the perfect balance in between doing a lot of damage to sustain yourself to stay alive, and also having a very solid defensive kit. So let's talk about what Warriors have for their offensive toolkit. Warrior is all about two things. It's about building a beast gauge, which is this gauge that you can see right here. I have the simplified version on for this one because it's just a number, nothing too complicated. If you turn on your tank stance, you have this little icon next to it. The way you fill it is by doing one of your two combos. We have the Storm's Eye combo, which is the combo you want to use first, because other than doing damage and giving you 20 gauge, it also gives you the Storm's Eye buff, which increases the damage you deal for 30 seconds. The second combo is called Storm's Path. This will generate 30 beast gauge instead of 20, so it's better to use in between as long as you don't need to refresh Storm's Eye. But Storm's Path itself will also heal you for 250 potency. This is slightly weaker than Gunbreaker because Gunbreaker is 150 heal, 150 shield, Warrior is just 250 heal, but it's not a huge difference. Another way that you can generate beast gauge is by using Infuriate, but I'll talk about Infuriate in just a little bit, as there is also a new trait strung together with that ability when it comes to spending your beast gauge. So spending the gauge, we have 4 main abilities that we can spend it on. We have our Gap Closer, Onslaught, consumes 20 gauge. We have Upheaval, which is off GCD again as well, just off GCD, single target attack. When it comes to prioritizing this, Upheaval is your most, or like the highest priority, because it does the most damage per gauge spent, and then seeing how it's also an off GCD, you're not sacrificing a GCD worth of damage to use this. So Upheaval, use this on cooldown. It's the strongest thing that you have in your toolkit when it comes to like spending your beast gauge efficiently. Onslaught you pretty much want to never use unless it is as a gap closer, because the damage per gauge that you're losing is not really worth it. You only use this during your in release windows, which is like your big burst, and otherwise just as a I guess you could also use it to kind of fix your gauge. You do this after your opener, which you'll see when I do the big rotation. But yeah, those are just two, because I'll just use Infuriate for now and click off my buff, which you can see here. You have 2 other abilities that you can use. These are GCDs. You have Felcleave, which is the single target version, and you have Decimate, which is the AoE version. For the most case, you're just going to be using Felcleave when it comes to single target fights. In AoE situations, as soon as there are 3 enemies, you can use Decimate. Now, one other thing, together with this beast gauge, is Inner Release. This allows you to use all of your beast gauge actions without having to pay the cost for them, which is why you always want to be using Onslaught during your Inner Release window, because it's free damage. So that's why Onslaught is usually reserved just for the Inner Release. One other cool thing with Infuriate is, as you can see, well, first of all, it has 2 charges. But as you use Felcleaves or Decimates, you're also going to take off 5 seconds of the cooldown every time you use one of these two. So in other words, make sure that this is not going to overcap when you use in release, because you're going to be spamming 5 fell cleaves or decimates, which is 25-second cooldown reduction of your infuriate. So that's why you want to make sure that if you do press in release, because you can see it's just going to tick down quite hard. And then of course we can just use upheaval, we can use onslaught, and it consumes 0 gauge, as you can see. Well, I was at 0 when it started, and it's still at 0, and I could use all of my abilities. Now, for Infuriate, and this is where Infuriate becomes a little bit more intricate to your rotation, is that when you use Infuriate, you get a buff called Nascent Chaos, which is this thing over here. And if you paid attention, my Decimate and Onslaught have now upgraded into Chaotic Cyclone and Inner Chaos. These are both stronger variants of Fellcleave and Decimate, but they also count as a direct hit crit, which is a very important feature of them. So this is what Inner Chaos looks like, and then I need to use it again, Infuriate, to get another Nascent Chaos, and then I have Chaotic Cyclone. Now, the reason why the direct hit crit portion of this is so important is because when you use Inner Release, all of your attacks are going to be direct hit crits as well. So in other words, you never want to use Infuriate during Inner Release or right before. If you use it right before Inner Release, you need to make sure you use that Inner Chaos before you press Inner Release, because otherwise you're going to be losing a lot of damage. It might be optimal to have the higher damage ability of Inner Chaos hit under raid buffs, but then on the other hand, you are going to be losing a direct hit Fellcleave, basically. A direct hit crit Fellcleave. So that's why in 99% of the cases, unless it's at the end of the fight and you won't get all of your Inner Release Fellcleaves in anyways, but in 99% of the cases, you want to use Infuriate, then use your Inner Chaos, and then go into Inner Release, or go into Inner Release and then when you're done, use your Infuriate and then do the Inner Chaos afterwards. Yeah, so that's that for AoE. Warrior's AoE is pretty simple. You have Overpower, which is a cone AoE, and then you have this thing, which does two things for you. One, it extends the duration of Storm's Eye, so if I had Storm's Eye active, I would have gotten 10 seconds? Yeah, 10 seconds of extra duration on it. And it also gives you 20 beast gauge. So you're just going to be spamming these two buttons, and then when you have enough beast gauge, you can spend it on a decimate. And that's really all there is to Warrior's offensive toolkit. It's really simple to pick up. It's mainly the optimization where Warrior becomes a lot more intricate, because they're all going to be about balancing your beast gauge, making sure that you spend all of your strongest abilities during burst and raid buff windows. The main raid buff that Warrior is going to be looking out for is Trick Attack from Ninja, because of the nature of the job with having all of the inner, the direct hit crits from Inner Release and the Nascent Chaos abilities, stuff like Dragoon's Battle Litany, Battle Voice, Chain Stratagem, all of that Warrior doesn't care about. So pairing it up with a Ninja, a Monk synergizes really well with Inner Release, Dancer, Red Mage, those kind of things are all going to be really good jobs to buff the Warrior's damage output. As working around Trick Attack kind of also fixes your rotation. For every Trick Attack, you will be able to have one Upheaval, a Fellcleave, and 2 Infuriate usages, meaning you can get 2 Inner Chaos under there as well. So you're kind of creating your own little burst window yourself. So it's all about making sure Storm's Eye is up, making sure you have enough beast gauge to use the Fellcleave, the Upheaval, and making sure that you are going to have 2 Infuriate usages during that as well, without overcapping on Infuriate. So on the surface, Warrior is really simple to pick up, really simple to perform well on, but when you really want to take it to the next level, Warrior becomes probably one of the most difficult tanks to keep track of the whole rotation. But that's just in my opinion, of course. A lot of people I've heard think Gunbreaker is so much more complicated to play. In my opinion, Gunbreaker just pushes a lot of buttons, and I think Warrior is a lot harder to keep optimized than it is compared to Gunbreaker or something. But yeah, that's it for Warrior. For the offensive toolkit, I am going to spend my beast gauge real quick, and then I'll show you the opener, which is really simple. One thing that has changed from the old warrior, you don't use equilibrium in the opener anymore because of how the new tank stances work. So you really just keep equilibrium for the heal instead of for the aggro generation. So opener goes like this. Tomahawk, because you're mostly going to be the main tank. Use Infuriate to get your Nascent Chaos up. Use Storm's Eye to get your damage buff. Use the Inner Chaos, because you don't want to use it during Inner Release. And then we go into our Inner Release, we spam Felk Leaves. And then of course our 2 off GCDs, which I use in the beginning. And then at the end we use our Infuriate again, so that we don't overcap on our Infuriate charges. So that's the opener, really simple, really straightforward. Warrior is also probably the tank that pushes the least amount of GCDs, meaning that it has a lot of room to weave their defensive tools in as well. Meaning that as for a new player, Warrior is probably a really good tank to pick up if you're new to tanking, if you're unsure about things to do, and especially because if you're afraid of dying, you're able to keep yourself alive quite easily. So with that being said, let's go into its defensive toolkit and talk more about those things. So first of all, as with every tank, Warrior has Rampart, 20% damage reduction, last 20 seconds, 90-second cooldown. Nothing special about this. Its 2-minute variant is a nerf towards Stormblood. It's a 5-second reduction that they got on it, but it is to keep it in line with all of the other tanks. So Vengeance, 30% damage reduction for 10 seconds, 2-minute cooldown. But what does make Vengeance better than everything else of the other tanks is the fact that you are counter-attacking every time you get hit for 55 potency. Now, 55 potency is not a lot, but it is a nice little thing, especially when you're in a dungeon and you're pulling 10 mobs, for example. Every time all of those 10 mobs hit you, you're technically attacking for 550 potency, which is quite nice. The other cool thing about this counterattack is the fact that it actually works with Inner Release. So if you remember, Inner Release gives you the direct hit buff on all of your abilities. This counts for that direct hit crit buff as well. So that's why it is actually pretty cool to use like that. So yeah, Vengeance is a little bit better than the other ones, not defensive wise, but that it gives you a bit of offense as well. Then when we look at Warrior's special abilities, Warrior's special, well, or unique ability, I guess you could say, is called Thrill of Battle. This increases your HP by 20%, also healing the amount that it increased you. So again, there's already like a 20% heal for Warrior, but it also increases the HP recovered via healing actions. These are everything. It used to be only GCD healing actions, but now stuff like Tetra, Lustrate, Excog, and even your own Equilibrium is all affected by this heal buff of Thrill of Battle. So Thrill of Battle is a really solid cooldown to use, especially looking at how tanking cooldowns don't stack exponentially. For example, if I were to use Rampart, which is 20%, and Vengeance, which is 30%, I am not reducing my damage taken by 50%, but more or less along the lines of 38% or something like that. I'm not entirely sure how the calculations work, but it's not a flat increase on top of each other. But since Thrill of Battle increases your HP and not the actual reduction, not reducing any damage that you take, but just increasing the buffer of HP you have to take the damage, means that it scales really well with all of your other mitigation. Meaning that you can use it together with Raw Intuition, which is your spammable cooldown. Reduces damage by 20%, so if we compare it to Gunbreaker from yesterday, that's a 5% increase in damage that you mitigate. And it also scales flat with Thrill of Battle. So Thrill of Battle gives you 20% more HP, and then you also reduce the damage you take with Raw Intuition by 20 that you take as well. So it's a really cool combo that you can do. Then again, as I mentioned quickly before, Equilibrium, it's a heal of 1200 potency. Oh, I actually messed it up in the Gunbreaker video. I said Gunbreaker was only 1000 potency, but it's the same potency if I'm not mistaken. If I am, then, well, so be it. But potency is really close to it anyways. But it's just, of GCD, you push it, you regenerate 1200 potency worth of HP, gets buffed by Thrill of Battle, as I mentioned before. So this is really nice for oh shit moments of I'm going to die, let's just use this. The way I usually like to use it is if there is a tank buster coming up and I feel like I have low HP, I'll just use this before the tank buster to make sure that I'm topped off. Or vice versa, if I have enough HP to survive the tank buster, then I'll use it after the tank buster hit me to make sure that I don't die to auto attacks or something like that. So yeah, Equilibrium, really strong, really good, I love it. It is one of the other main toolkits of the warrior to keep themselves alive without the need of anybody else. Then when we look at party mitigation, warrior has probably the strongest shield in Shake It Off. It's a 12% shield of maximum HP for everyone, which can be buffed by using Thrill of Battle, Vengeance or Raw Intuition. For every buff used to shake off your hotbar, I guess you could say, you get 2% extra mitigation on top. Basically, this always turns into a 14% shield, because you should always be able to use Raw Intuition with this. So it's really strong in that regard. When we look at the main tank mitigation, when you are in the off-tank role, we have Nascent Flash. This is arguably the weakest out of all of the tanks, because it only reduces the damage taken by 10%. Again, if we compare it to Gunbreaker, Gunbreaker had 15. But on the other hand, it does give the effect of Nascent Glint, which basically acts like a mini bloodbath. So for the next 3 GCDs, which is usually what you can get into this duration, you're going to be healing the other tank for a portion of the damage that you deal, and you also heal yourself. So this is really nice when there is a tank buster that hits both you and the other tank, because you'll be able to heal both yourself and the other tank with this ability. This is also incredibly strong when you go into a dungeon, because you can just put it on the healer and you start spamming in-release decimates, and you're just, if you're hitting 10 mobs, you might be healing for like 150k damage per decimate that you do. Or 150k HP, which is more than your maximum HP, by the way. So Nascent Flash is incredibly strong in keeping yourself alive into dungeons, especially when you can pair it up with something like an In Release, or if you have Infuriate stacks left, you can use it on some Chaotic Cyclones and you're going to be healing for a crap ton of HP. Finally, Warrior's final ability, or their ultimate ability, is Home Gang. This also got nerfed in Shadowbringers. I think they got added on from 3 to 4 minutes. But still, it is one of the best tanking mitigation skills when it comes to their supers. As I briefly touched on before in the Gunbreaker video, it just makes it so that you cannot drop below 1 HP. The downside of Home Gang is the fact that if there are auto attacks following soon after the tank buster, healers need to be quick to heal you up, because otherwise you might just drop to the auto attack that comes after. Then on the other hand, you do have Equilibrium, so you could save Equilibrium to use after your Home Gang ends, to kind of make sure that you don't die to the auto attacks by healing yourself before the healers come in and do their job as well. So when we look at it defensive wise, Shake It Off is incredibly strong, but if you compare it to something like Heart of Light or Dark Knight's alternative, forgot the name, it's a bit stronger when it comes to mitigating single hits, especially if we look at E1S, where it's all percentage HP damage. Shields are incredibly viable or valuable, so having Shake It Off there is incredibly strong. On the other hand, when it comes to mitigating multi-hit rate-wide damage, it is incredibly weak, because it's only going to be mitigating 1 hit for the most part, instead of mitigating 4 or 5 hits like Heart of Light would. But overall, Shake It Off just really solid. And then Nascent Flash, it's a bit weak compared to the other tanks, but it is pretty alright, because you're still regenning the tank and kind of healing them back up after the fact. So that's it for Warrior. Warrior is pretty fun. It's a pretty chill job to play. If you don't want to go too hard into min-maxing, it's incredibly satisfying to play as well, because you're seeing a lot of big numbers pop up, because you have so much guaranteed direct hit crit attacks. So rotation flows really nice as well, and then just the fact that you are this beast of a defensive tank, as well as just being able to sustain yourself for so long, is what makes it incredibly fun. So with that being said, that's kind of all I wanted to talk about with the warrior. I hope you enjoyed it. If you still have some more questions about warrior, feel free to ask me in the comments down below. I do have my worth of first weekly clears of warrior, which is on my alt up on my channel. So if you're curious to see how warrior performs in some of the fights, then you can check it over there. You can also see that there are some differences between how we handled having warrior instead of a gunbreaker, because we want to abuse the home gang a bit more, because it has a shorter cooldown than the Superbolite of a gunbreaker. But yeah, both tanks really fun to play. If I had to choose one, probably gunbreaker for when I feel like putting into effort, into like pressing a lot of buttons. If I want to just chill and play a tank and just not really have to care about too much, or if I'm just playing in a party finder, for example, and I'm not sure if my healers will just keep me alive because it's just a random party and they're not really working together, then warrior is also my first choice, because you just have so many tools to keep yourself alive compared to the other tanks. So yeah, warrior is really fun. Definitely recommend people to try it out. If you're new to tanking, it's probably one of the best tanks to start with. It does get a bit more complex if you want to min-max it totally, but outside of that, it's really not that difficult to play, and I definitely recommend people to try it out. So with that, I want to thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.